E41 Marketplace Ministries. It's all about your business, and it's all about our Father's business. It's ministry outside the box. No matter what your role is in the business world, E41 Ministries is a special place where we can walk worthy of the vocation wherewith we are called, just as Ephesians 4:1 commands us. In today's busy and frenetic world, it's a blessing to know that God has a plan to bring hope, comfort, and peace through Marketplace Ministry. The E41 Marketplace Ministry of the Fellowship, it's a kingdom-building business.
Hi, I'm Kerry Fink, and together with Dave Robinson, we're here with E41 Marketplace Fellowship. And we're so delighted that you've joined us today. And we have some very special guests. On my left is J.B. Kump, and he is the president of the Greater Titusville Area Chamber of Commerce. Welcome.
Thank you very much, Kerry.
And also Tom Best. Nice to see you, Tom.
Nice to see you.
Tom is an expert financial advisor and business consultant, and it's just a pleasure to have you here with us today. And before we really jump into the conversation, for folks that are new to E41 Marketplace Fellowship, I'd like to introduce you to Dave Robinson, who is the person that is in charge of the whole concept and really how we got here. He's the author of a book called Idle in the Marketplace, and it's a good story about why the time is right now to connect what we learn Sunday in church with the rest of our lives Monday through Saturday. And hopefully, as a result of doing that correctly, we're really going to increase our effectiveness at kingdom building.
Kerry, the title E41 comes from Ephesians 4:1, which says, walk worthy in the vocation wherein you are called. And the word calling in the King James is better translated, or the word vocation is better translated calling. So the calling to the marketplace is for everyone. And a few verses later in chapter 4, it talks about that he gave some to be apostles, prophets, pastors, teachers, and evangelists to equip the saints mentioned in verse 1, the marketplace ministers for their calling. And so I believe that every Christian is a full-time gospel minister. Some work in the church world and some work in the marketplace. The fellowship, which was started in 1962 by Gordon Lindsay, who also started Christ for the Nations Bible Training Center, along with 18 other men at the Baker Hotel in Dallas. It was for the purpose of having a fellowship. It's not an ecclesiastical organization. It is just simply a fellowship of people of like precious faith, like-mindedness. About 5 years ago, we started talking about if this is not an ecclesiastical organization, then why can't marketplace ministers be a part? And so we actually now have a place on the application where marketplace leaders can join as full partners, and they've asked me to develop the whole marketplace thrust where we're going to build a bridge between the church leaders and the marketplace leaders for the purpose of world evangelism. It's not another organization, but it's simply a fellowship, place of a forum for discussion, ask questions, help people be empowered both in the church world and in the marketplace.
And one of the things that's very interesting for both of you guys to know is that Dave, for many years, headed the fellowship's mission efforts. And in fact, I think it's like, how many days did you spend on the road last year?
It was 287 days last year.
And traveling to all these different countries all over the world and talking with missionaries, you know, the common theme is they're always like, how do we get more support from, you know, the mainland, if you will? And one of the things that Dave, coming from a business background, was always very strongly talking about was the fact that the best way to do it is help those people find a business base to be able to then be sort of self-sustaining in their own endeavors. And I think that's really what led you to start to really think about the marketplace as a mission field. Is that?
Well, you know, I worked in both fields. I gave leadership to churches for 40 years, and during that same 40-year period, I spent a lot of time in the marketplace, owned several businesses, and I understood both sides. And when I started traveling internationally, the Lord said that He put enough resources in every nation, even the poorest ones, to evangelize that nation. And so I thank God for all the missionaries who gave what I call into-the-line missions investments. which have to be then recreated and constant pipeline to get that there. But I think we need to rethink that and help the nationals and the missionaries understand how to tap into the marketplace, because the resources are there, and help them evangelize their own nation.
And with E41 Marketplace Fellowship, I think the idea is helping, and particularly Dave's organization, Coaching for Ministers. He talks to ministers about helping the church pastor and the leadership of the church then be able to be even more effective in what they talk about and teach on Sunday, to really motivate the congregation then to become an extension or an amplification, if you will, of what they learn, in the church. But now, Monday through Saturday, we take it to the marketplace. And that's really where I want to speak to you guys, because you're also in the same position of being strong, committed Christians, but also dealing not only in the marketplace. But I'd like to start with you, JB. Tell us a little bit about your background and how that your Christianity in the marketplace is all connected.
Well, it's interesting, Kerry. When I was in high school, I felt a call to the ministry, and while I never went to school, I never took a pledge or was never chosen by a church to be their pastor, I feel I answered that call. Every profession I've been in, and some people say I can't hold a job because I've been in so many of them, I and my wife with me have always partnered to take the gospel wherever we were, to live it out, first of all, and to extend it into the marketplace. I've been in the military, was there for 20 and a half years, as was Tom, an officer in the U.S. Air Force. I've served in the aerospace career field, done some broadcast work, worked for a member of the U.S. House of Representatives, did some full-time Christian fundraising work for an overseas ministry, and now I have my own consulting firm and chair a Chamber of Commerce in one of the major cities in Florida.
That's excellent. And as you walk through those different facets of your life, how do you bring your faith into the marketplace, particularly in this day and age where we live, where everything is so politically correct, and you want to walk that line carefully? But how do you balance all of that out?
I don't know how people don't do it, frankly. But I've been on the side of, and Tom can perhaps express this as well, trying to explain to pastors and church members alike that if you intend to impact your society as a Christian, how can you not be involved in the marketplace and in politics? Mm-hmm. It's difficult to get Christians to engage themselves in voting drives, for example, or to even consider running for office, let alone supporting a candidate. But I feel if you read Christ's words, if you see the direction that we are to take as Christians, you can't turn your back on that aspect of life. Maybe you weren't called to be a politician, but you were called to be an economist, a financial advisor. Do that in a Christ-like way, and don't be shy about talking about the fact that it's because of Christ that you're there.
No, that's very good. Now, Tom, your background is financial advisor. You're an expert in all facets of that. You've done all your studies and licensed and all that sort of thing in those areas. And you're also an expert business consultant. Tell us a little bit about your background and how. And let me ask the same question: as you've walked through the various facets of your life, how have you managed your Christianity and the business marketplace?
Well, interestingly, my background is very similar to JB's. In fact, it's almost as if I followed in his footsteps. I too am a retired Air Force officer. I spent a combined 28 years on active duty and in the Air Force Reserve. I too worked for a member of the U.S. House of Representatives. In fact, JB was my predecessor there.
I think he's trying to imply he's my younger version or something.
And then subsequently, I spent a couple of years working for a defense contractor, deployed overseas to Iraq. And during this time, back in the early 90s, when I voluntarily left active duty, that's when I first got into the financial services industry. and began to appreciate the opportunity that is presented by doing that type of work. And in terms of, like JB said, not only educating pastors and lay people, at the same time stressing the importance of being in marketplace ministry. And we see the example of Christ himself.
Yeah.
Christ was in the marketplace.
Well, no, it's important. And Dave, let me ask you, as you connect these dots, you know, through coaching for ministers, you're talking with pastors, and you've always, forgive me if I say this the wrong way, but you've explained you somehow often find yourselves in the position of interpreting between the two languages that are spoken, and actually spend some of your time trying to bridge that gap. Is that?
Well, the reason that I named what I do in the coaching world, coaching for ministers, and the assumption by many is that that includes the church leaders. And I say it includes them, but it's not limited to them. And then I take them through the routine of Ephesians 4. We're all ministers of the gospel. And you cannot have a secular job if you're a Christian and understand the priesthood of all believers. Because when you touch anything, it becomes a holy sacrifice to God, according to Peter. And so I would be very careful in holding up a secular job as a sacrifice to God, because I don't think he would receive it. But he will receive if you, whatever he's called you to do, hold that up as a sacrifice, as ministry to him. And so I'm between helping the church leaders understand you don't have a lot of secular-minded people in your congregation. You have called ministers of the gospel according to Ephesians 4:1. You need to see them that way and help them leverage what God has called you to do through them in the marketplace.
I think as members of churches, we're on dangerous grounds when we consider and turn over the ministry to only those who are ordained.
Yes.
That's not biblical to begin with. And if you carry it to its full extent, you've been in foreign countries, I'm sure, where the member in the pew turns over his Christian responsibility to who he pays to do the job of ministering, and basically backs out of any evangelical work, any witnessing, anything in the marketplace at all, and turns the Christian business over to the businessman, the pastor.
And that's why we're losing in the marketplace in this country and around the world. And we've got to shift that, and it starts with educating the church leaders that the marketplace men are not a threat to you, but sent by God to you as gifts for you to equip, according to the text in Ephesians 4, for their ministry in the marketplace.
Yeah, we've been, my wife and I have been attending a Bible class here recently, and one of the focal points has been, we've been hearing teachings about, I always mispronounce it, but ecclesia, and about how most of us didn't really have this understanding until we get deeper into it, that the first, the church originally had a much different structure than what we see today with, the professional pastor and the congregation who, like you said, shows up on Sunday and they think, okay, I gave God my couple hours, now I'll get on with my life. And I think what we're really hoping to do with E41 Marketplace Fellowship is create a whole new, I would say even a paradigm of bridging that gap, and actually almost taking us full circle back to what the original church looked like. Is that a reasonable way to look at it?
The marketplace was the mission field in the first century. When the upper room crowd spilled out of that upper room after the day of Pentecost, they were in the marketplace. There was no bricks or mortars then. And I believe, as you said, Kerry, God has brought us back as a church worldwide to the 21st century now. It's the marketplace that is the mission field. And we have to release those marketplace ministers to their full kingdom calling.
Now, it's rough enough in the business world to go out and exemplify and talk about your faith in the marketplace. It has to be even more difficult when you get into the government side of things. I want to ask you, first of all, I wanted to ask you to bring up the comment about how these three areas work together, And then secondly, I want to ask you just anecdotally, how did you manage that when you were in really sort of a public limelight as being part of a government, process? So first,
Well, when I wrote the book, one of the things the Lord put in my heart was there are three entities that control every nation, every region, every community. It's the business community that pays for everything. It's the government that passes the laws and regulations that control the society. And the educators determine the values and philosophies of both the marketplace leaders and the government leaders. And so for the last 2 generations, now soon to be 3 generations, secular humanism has been the state religion that has taught our marketplace leaders, our business people, and our government leaders their worldview, how they see they are to operate. And so you take institutions like Harvard, Yale, Oxford, Cambridge, all the leaders in the educational community who for years were basically Christian in nature. But in 1933, the Humanist Manifesto was written, and it reads like the doctrinal statement of the secular humanists. And if you've never read it, I encourage every church leader, every marketplace leader, read it, because that's what's been indoctrinated in the leaders in the government and in the business world. And God has raised up the church to go into those entities and not to hide in the shadows, but to go in, create real value. You don't have a platform of credibility unless you bring value. You have to bring value there, but when you do, God will position you like He did Daniel, Joseph, and everyone else through the years. Then they can really help them understand what the kingdom is all about.
I think creating real value and contributing value added wherever you are
Yes.
is critical. I think also understanding the rules by which the secular world governs, rendering under Caesar. You can't be ignorant of how they establish themselves and how they want to govern, because they have limits. They sometimes want to ignore those limits, but you need to know where they are.
Absolutely.
So you can operate within them.
Very true.
yeah, I was going to ask you, because in that supercharged kind of environment that you guys operated within, how did you balance all of that out I mean, there has to be stories, because we've had stories along the way where we've heard of some amazing opportunities where perhaps somebody found the Lord, but it happened in the most unusual way. It wasn't, hey, come with me to church on Sunday. It happened through a situation that occurred in a marketplace situation, and all of a sudden they saw something and said, there's meaning in that, and that became that.
I don't think we can expect that we're going to be without trouble living as a Christian in the marketplace. Sometimes, I talked about the rules, but sometimes the rules are kind of hazy, and that line of demarcation is, I led a staff of a dozen or so people in a major industry, and I started and this was in a secular environment totally, I started my staff meetings with prayer. Now, I didn't just jump into that practice. I approached every member of my staff and said, this is what I've done in every office I've led in the past. If I did this, would you have a problem with that? Would it offend you? And to a person, everyone I spoke with, when I approached them privately, individually, one-on-one, said, no, and several of them said, I would consider that refreshing. Well, about 6 months into my term in that job, my higher level of authority called me and said, JB, you're going to have to quit this prayer stuff. I said, oh, I didn't even know you knew I was praying. He said, well, I knew about it because somebody complained to me. One of your staff members complained that you're making them pray. I said, oh, really? Well, let me explain what's going on. And eventually, I stopped making that a part of the staff meeting. So 5 minutes before staff meeting began, anybody who wanted to come into my office and pray with me could do so. And then we would start official staff meetings. Nobody was required to do it. But after that, I got a lot of requests to pray with people privately, to work on family situations, totally off line from our job. But it gave me an opportunity, I think, to expand.
I think this has become increasingly more difficult over time, Kerry. Back when I was working for a member of the House, I often had the occasion to pray in public at various events. Those with whom I worked, they knew my boss's values, and they understood that my values aligned with him as a believer in Jesus Christ. And I encountered very little flack or resistance of any kind. But what I see happening today is it seems to be becoming increasingly more difficult as we continue this slide into secularism and political correctness.
Yeah, one of the things Dave brought up earlier when we were having this discussion was that you mentioned this term about we've got to take back territory, and it was interesting how you brought that up, because it's territory that once belonged, and now it's in question. And you actually make a call then to say, okay, if we're real Christians, we have to stand out in the marketplace. We have to stand out in the government. We have to be there. We have to show up for the fight, I guess, if you would.
Well, the church is in the marketplace. The question is, why are they standing idle? And I think the reasons that you guys have addressed is one of the reasons, because we have people now who are strong Christians in their belief, but they don't know how to approach the marketplace with the rules as they are now. They weren't always that way. People say, well, you can't legislate morality. Morality gets legislated every day. It's a question of whose morality is going to get legislated. See, back 100 years ago in America, it was the Christians' morality that was legislated because the Christians held sway in places of influence. And now they don't as much as they used to. So now it's the kingdom of darkness. It's their morality that's being held as the standard. So we have to go in with those rules, but the church needs a strategy on how we're going to change those rules and take back the ground that we once held. And military men know that once you give up the ground, it takes 2 to 3 times as much of everything to regain that ground. The challenge for the church is, are we willing to expend the time, effort, resources, and pay the price to take it back, or are we going to just let them have it all?
Well, I was going to say, I love the story that JB told when he was confronted with a challenge in the marketplace that would seemingly cause someone to just back off and say, well, I'll keep my faith private. But instead found a unique and creative way to employ, our freedom, to worship as we see fit, and to make that part of the whole, make that part of the solution by finding a good way to move around it. And I think we're given a level of creativity and God-given insight in how to work with those kind of situations. So I wanted to applaud that and say that to me is part of having not a timid spirit and going into the marketplace, but just moving forward.
Okay, it's understanding the rules and making the adjustment, but not just making that adjustment. At the same time, we need to have a strategy on where we're going to change the rules. They were changed by somebody at some point. They can be changed back. And part of the E41 Fellowship is just having these kinds of dialogues and having that resource available to where people can talk to one another, just like we're talking today, all over the world.
You mentioned the military model that Tom and I are both familiar with. Training takes place at different levels in the military, often as it does in industry now, where you do individual training, and then you do more global training, and then you have the strategy that you're talking about. I'm more familiar with the firing line, if you will, the individual. I've got a friend who's a lineman for an electric company, for example, and he's a firm believer, and the company has guidelines on what you can and cannot do, but you can work within any guideline. For example, he carries a Christian book that he's studying in his Bible study with him on the job, in the truck. At lunchtime, typically everybody brings their lunch. He pulls out his book and he's flipping through it, and his people that are working with him on the job, he doesn't hold it in front of them and stick it under their nose and get oppressive about it. He simply is there. He's doing his thing, and he finds people come and ask him, what are you reading? What's in that book? And it gives him an opportunity then to interject and to answer questions. And I think you can do this creatively as long as you've got an intent. Now, we need to translate that, and I'm encouraged to find you doing a more global, intentional approach to that on a larger basis.
Yeah. Tom, we just have a moment or two, but I wanted to ask you, you were recently working literally in harm's way in Iraq, and there you are confronted literally with life threat. You came back telling us stories about, literally airstrikes happening while you're there, and just, all the danger and everything that comes with that. And did you find an opportunity to express your faith with some of the people that you worked with there in a meaningful way?
Well, that's a good question. And in fact, I did. Of course, being in Iraq, and I was in Baghdad, and I was amongst a lot of Arab, Iraqi people and Muslims in their faith, and we even had Muslims that I worked side by side with. That we had some Iraqi Americans. We had Iraqis that actually came from within the community that worked with us. And once again, I didn't flaunt my Christianity, but I had some very good conversations that took place with other members of our staff on the subject of truth, and on the subject of who God is and why we're here. Those ultimate questions that are presented in life. So in fact, I did have that opportunity. And interestingly, some of the best times I've ever had with the Lord were when I was there and I was in the midst of those people from another culture, many with a different belief system, and in the midst of some of the dangers that were presented as well.